There are growing concerns around the ethics of the government's communication strategy during COVID-19. Dr. Gary Sidley, a former clinical psychologist with the NHS for over 30 years, says the government's use of behavioural science needs more scrutiny.
I and many others are increasingly concerned about our direction of travel, and we're strategically using methods that we know are going to increase people's emotional distress as a way of getting them to do and behave in the way the state wants them to behave. I don't know whether you remember this, but I can. This way it showed a real close-up of an actor, again in an intensive care unit, obviously struggling for breath, and the voiceover then said something along the lines of, can you look this person in the eyes and saying that you're doing all you can to stop the spread of COVID? So all this really continual images that equate being a good person, virtue, with being a conformist, following the rules.
One key player is the Behavioural Insights Team, or Nudge Unit, which uses psychological strategies to influence people. Formed in 2010 by David Cameron's government, it now has operations around the world. While it's now independent from the government, Sidley says behavioural scientists are embedded in most government departments, not just SAGE. He says their policies include the use of fear, shaming and scapegoating to increase people's compliance with restrictions and the vaccine rollout.
The fear inflation has undoubtedly contributed significantly to the tens of thousands of non-COVID excess deaths that we've seen over the last 2 years. People being too frightened to go to hospital with non-COVID problems, old people dying of loneliness in the care homes because they're not getting any visitors.
Sidley says people weren't given informed consent, a cornerstone of medical ethics. It's a topic that's also concerning politicians. Sammy Wilson, Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group of Pandemic Response and Recovery, tells me such tactics need to be scrutinised.
There's another impact of the policy of using these nudge tactics to put fear and instill fear in people to the point where they even don't look after their own health and do what they would normally have done. And that is, if you're sick, go and see a doctor, go to the hospital or whatever, because we're told, go to the hospital, you might get infected. Go to the hospital, you might infect others. Go to the hospital and you'll put the National Health Service in jeopardy, and you've got to save the NHS. And we're now getting the backlog of that.
How much concern is there around about this among your colleagues at Westminster?
Well, I think that only now, when people realise the extent of the fear which has been instilled in the population, are people beginning to ask questions. I don't know that there's still a realisation amongst my colleagues that this tactic could be used time and time again to ensure that other government policies, unpopular policies which are going to have an impact on people's lives, are adhered to and gain support of the public. And as I say to you, the next big one I think that this is going to be used on is climate change. The government's going to ask people to change their eating habits, their travel habits, spend a lot of money on changing the heating in their home, face higher energy bills, face restrictions on the kinds of cars they can buy, a whole range of things. Now, normally people, if the government tried to tell them to do that, they would tell them to go and shove it. We're going to lead our lives as we so desire. How are you going to persuade people to do that? And we already see it. If you don't adhere to the policies required for zero carbon by 2050, then the world's going to fry. You're going to cause disasters all over the place. We're going to have wars. I mean, you can see the tactics already developing. And, I don't want to live in a country which is ruled by a state of fear. This is a democracy. I don't want to see people's mental health affected by the government cynically using fear and tactics to get people to be compliant. I mean, if we wanted that, we'd go and live in a dictatorship. But this is a democracy, and that's why I think that this whole area of nudging, as they call it, has to be scrutinised. It needs to be scrutinised by Parliament. There needs to be very clear guidelines laid down, and when politicians use those kind of tactics, they've got to be challenged.
The Prime Minister was directly challenged in the Commons on the tactics by Steve Baker just over a week ago.
Millions of people took seriously a communications campaign apparently designed by behavioural psychologists to bully, to shame and to terrify them into compliance with minute restrictions on their freedom. What is my right honourable friend's central message to those people who meticulously complied with all of the rules and suffered terribly for it, including, I might say, those people whose mental health will have suffered appallingly as a result of the messages his government was sending out?
The Behavioural Insights team didn't respond to NTD for comment. The British Psychological Society, which has previously said the methods used weren't covert, also didn't respond. Jane Worrell, NTD News, London.